Who doesn't like going for a walk in the woods on a beautiful autumn day like today? Stately trees producing lots of nice cool shade, lush green leaves just starting to turn nice shades of orange and red, and the beautiful and relaxing calls of birds and insects. But have you ever stopped to think about how important woodlands are for things other than just a lovely walk? Trees and their leaves help filter our water and our air by filtering runoff and taking the pollutants out of the air. Trees also sequester carbon by absorbing carbon dioxide through photosynthesis. Trees also provide food and shelter for a lot of our wildlife, and even we humans depend on trees for things all the way from timber to food to medicines. So thanks for joining me for this beautiful walk through the woods at Johnson's Mound today to learn about this important woodland ecosystem. So I just mentioned that word ecosystem. An ecosystem is a collection of all of the living or biotic organisms in a geographical area living in community with all of the non-living or abiotic organisms and components such as the wind and the air. We have many different types of ecosystems here in Kane County. We have prairies and wetlands and woodlands like we have here at Johnson's Mound Forest Preserve. In addition, there are several different types of woodlands based on the shade cover that we get from the tree canopy.
We assign names to the different types of woodland communities based on the shade gradient. You can see them on the horizontal on this diagram. First, the savanna has the least shade, 10 to 30% shade cover. A woodland has 30 to 80% shade cover, and a forest greater than 80% shade cover.
So thinking of those different types of woodland communities, we're standing in right here at Johnson's Mound, a forest, mainly composed of maple and basswood trees. So a forest is made up of trees, and a lot of them. Trees, just like your body, are made of specialized parts. So let's take a look at each of them, starting from the ground up. Down at the bottom, below the soil, we have the roots of the tree. The roots absorb water and nutrients from the soil, they store energy, and they support the tree. The trunk of the tree provides a place for the branches to establish themselves. The branches support the leaves and spread the leaves out so that they can absorb the maximum amount of sunlight. The leaves themselves are the powerhouse of the tree. They produce all the tree's food from sunlight using photosynthesis. In photosynthesis, the leaves take carbon dioxide and sunlight and produce sugar, oxygen, and water. Now, if we were to be able to look inside the trunk of a tree, we would see many layers of specialized tissue.
So starting from the outside in, the first layer we see on the outside of a tree is the bark. The bark protects the tree from weather, insect damage, and disease. Further in, we see the cambium. This is a one-cell thick growing part of the tree. It produces a new ring of growth wood every year. Moving farther inside is the sapwood. This is the youngest wood of the tree. It's composed of xylem, tissue that transports water and minerals from the roots to the leaves, and phloem, that transports sugar or food from the leaves to the roots. At least a portion of the sapwood is living tissue. Next is the heartwood. This is the oldest wood of the tree. It's dead wood. It was originally sapwood, but with age it matured into heartwood. And lastly, right in the middle, we have the first growth ring. The growth rings are new layers of wood cells that are added inside the cambium every year.
What I have here is a tree cookie. So when a tree is standing up live, we can't actually see these rings, but this was cut from a fallen tree so that we could take a look at the different rings. What we can see from looking at the growth rings of a tree, we can see the different widths. Not all of the rings are evenly spaced. Some of them, like this one, are much thinner than others, like that one. That depends on the growing conditions during that particular year. A thick ring would result from a year where there was a lot of rain and good nutrients for the tree, whereas a thinner ring would be maybe in a drought year or where there weren't a lot of nutrients. We can also see scars left by fire or lightning strikes or insect damage. Don't see any on this one, but sometimes you'll see them. And we can even count the rings to tell the age of a tree. We would start in the middle with the first year's growth and work our way out. So, How do trees grow from a seed into a tree like this? This is black walnut, seed and tree. In the spring, this black walnut flowered, as all trees do, well, most trees, and the flowers on trees are pollinated either by wind or insects or other animals. And then they mature into fruit over the course of the spring and the summer. And they're dispersed in the fall, meaning they move away from the parent tree. And different trees have different ways of dispersing their seeds, very unique and interesting features. This black walnut has a fruit with a nut inside that is very round and rolls away from the parent tree. Other tree seeds are wind-borne. You're probably familiar with what are called samara of maples that twirl through the wind. Some trees like the cottonwood are blown through the wind. Other trees are called scatterers. Animals eat the nuts and then poop or scat them out further down the trail. This is a hickory nut that wildlife really loves. And lastly, some tree seeds are so tiny, like this wild black cherry, that they can float on water and are dispersed by water. But no matter their dispersion technique, the trees disperse their seeds in the fall. But they go through other changes during other seasons. So let's take a look at some of those.
In the fall, the trees respond to changes in sunlight and temperature by losing their leaves and becoming dormant, kind of like going into a deep sleep. In dormancy, photosynthesis stops, the green pigment of chlorophyll disappears, and other yellow and orange pigments called carotenoids and red pigments called anthocyanins become visible in the leaves. In the winter, trees send most of their sap, which is full of sugar, to the roots for storage. When spring rolls around, the days lengthen and the temperatures begin to warm, trees emerge from dormancy. Sap rises from the roots up through the trunk to the branches, providing energy for early leaf production. Next is summer. By the summertime, the trees are fully leafed out and producing all of their energy from photosynthesis. Most of a tree's growth occurs during the spring and the early summer months.
So just like you, a tree goes through different stages as it grows. It starts out as a seed. This is a seed of a maple. After the seed falls to the ground, it starts to germinate and becomes a sprout. Just one leaf sticking out at that time. As it gets larger, it starts to leaf out, and at this stage, the tree is called the seedling. A seedling can grow to be up to 3 feet tall. It's the sapling stage. A sapling can be a tree up to 30 feet tall where the trunk is flexible, but the tree is not yet capable of producing flowers and seeds. Once a tree does reach maturity and produces mature flowers and seeds, it becomes a mature tree, like we have here. So just like you need good, clean water and food to grow, trees do too. Tree needs are a little bit different though. All trees need 4 things to grow healthily: soil, air, water, and sun. We can remember that with the acronym SAWS. Sometimes invasive species get into our forests and other ecosystems, and they crowd out the native plants, in this case native trees, and they take more of those resources than they should, not making enough for the native trees. Let's take a look at some of the restoration techniques that the Forest Preserve System uses to control invasive plants in its woodlands.
Historically, woodlands in Kane County experienced recurring natural fires set by lightning strikes. Later, Native Americans used controlled fires to manage the landscape and to herd game animals together. Today, land managers at the Forest Preserve mimic these natural conditions and use a series of prescribed fire to control invasive species, recycle nutrients, and expose the soil so that seeds can reach it and germinate. Brush cutting. Manual and automated tools are used to cut out invasive understory plants and trees that shade out our native woodland trees so that the desirable trees can gather the resources, sun, water, soil, and air, they need to grow strong and healthy. Selective herbiciding. After brush clearing, we selectively use herbicide to inhibit the regrowth of cut plants. Tree planting. While trees naturally disperse seeds that grow into new trees, at the Forest Preserve District, we help the tree regeneration process along by planting desirable trees in prime woodland habitat.
On the forest edge, like we're standing right now, you'll find some tree species that need a lot more sun than those growing deep in the forest. For instance, this bur oak that I'm standing under requires quite a bit of sun, so you'll find it pretty commonly on the edge. Not so much in the deep woods, though. A healthy forest, like the one here at Johnson's Mound, has a lot of different species of trees, each filling an individual niche or role in the woodland. We've got several that we're going to take a look at. But before we get in there and have fun, because it is fun identifying trees, it's also scientifically important. But before we do that, we need to introduce a few botanical terminologies so that you can go and describe a tree there, then we can go on and identify it from there. So there's 4 things that we look for when we're IDing a tree. If the tree's leafed out, we look at the leaves, we look at the bark, the buds, and the fruit.
When the tree is leafed out, leaves are one of the easiest clues for identifying the tree species. We can look at several things to identify the species. First, we can look at the arrangement of the leaves on the stem. Leaves can either be alternating along the stem, opposite from each other on the stem, or whorled around the stem. Next, we look at the form of the leaf or the shape. We can have a simple form, a pinnately compound form, a palmately compound form, or a double pinnate compound form. Next, we look at the edge or the margin of the leaf. It can either be entire, which is smooth, toothed, lobed, or undulate, which is wavy. Lastly, we look at the base or the bottom of the leaf. Multiple possibilities. We can have a heart-shaped bottom, a cone-shaped or cunate bottom, a truncate or level bottom, a rounded bottom, or an oblique or asymmetrical bottom. Fruit is another very easy way to identify some tree species. There are many types of fruit. We can have an acorn, a nutlet with bracts, a samara, a legume, or a ball of achenes. In the winter, when the leaves and the fruit aren't available, we have to look at things like bark to identify the tree species. We can look at many things on the bark, including the color, the furrows, scales, texture, and even spines to help determine the tree species. Twigs can tell you so much. The most important clues on the twig are the buds and the leaf scars. The buds contain the next year's flowers or leaves. Their unique color, shape, size, and cluster formation is distinctive for many species of trees. Leaf scars are where the last year's leaves were attached. The size, shape, and patterns of the leaf scar help identify some species of trees.
So let's put those newfound botanical identification skills to use and identify some trees. Here's our first one. This tree, if you look at the leaves, they are simple leaves, alternately spaced on the twig, and lobed. The leaves are narrower at the base than they are at the distal end. If we look at the bark, very deeply grooved gray bark. It's very characteristic and corky looking. And lastly, if we look at the nut, this is the acorn of this tree. It's fairly large and it's fringed at the bottom. You can see those hairs down there. This is a bur oak. Tree number 2. Let's take a look at the leaves. We've got a simple leaf arranged alternately on the twig. The margins of the leaf are toothed and they're fairly fuzzy. But the real giveaway on this tree identification is the bark. Take a look at the bark here. It's really warty with corky, bumpy protuberances. This is a hackberry. Here's an interesting native tree that we'll take a look at next. First, let's look at the leaves. We've got heart-shaped leaves arranged alternately along the stem. The margins of the leaves are toothed, and the base of the leaf is uneven. This side is lower than this lobe. The real defining feature of this tree is not so much the bark, but the sprouts that often come off on the sides of the central trunk. That's very definitive of this tree. Multiple shoots. The final feature for this tree is the fruit. The fruit is actually a little nutlet that hangs below a specialized leafy bract. With that, we know that this tree is a basswood tree. There's a lot of special features of this tree. The first one that we just took a look at is that bud. That mustard yellow color is really distinctive. Next thing, we'll look at the leaves. This is a compound leaf, and the compound leaves are spaced alternately on the twig. The individual leaflets on the compound leaf are sort of oval shaped, and the margins are toothed. The nut of this tree, I pulled one down to show you, is indeed a nut, and it's got 4 quadrants or 4 sections, each of them marked by a little raised ridge. There's a nut inside there. The last thing we'll look at is the bark. Very smooth, light gray. Put all these clues together, and you have a bitternut hickory tree. Here's a tree you could easily confuse with a hickory. That's because it has compound leaves just like a hickory tree. But there's a couple of differing features that we're going to point out right now. Let's take a look at the leaves. So we've got the compound leaf with multiple leaflets along the central stem, just like a hickory. But take a look at how they're attached to the stem. They are opposite each other, not alternate along the stem. And look at the stem itself. It is 4-sided. It's square. This is a very unique feature. You don't see this on any other tree. It tells you that this is a blue ash. This is a type of maple, and if we look at the leaves, they are a different shape than we've seen before. They're called palmate. Almost looks like the palm of your hand with 5 lobes on the leaf. If we were to be able to see the seeds of this tree, they'd look pretty similar to this. These are maple seeds. They are called a double samara. So there are 2 sides to the leaf structure, or to the seed structure, and each of these little pockets has a seed in it. This is a very shade-tolerant tree. That's why it's growing so well in this deeply shaded forest. This is a sugar maple. Now, we talked earlier about the life cycle of a tree, but we skipped the last stage, decomposition. Decomposition is the process by which organic matter, like a tree, is broken down into simpler parts. These nutrients are used by growing trees. Let's take a little bit of a deeper look. Decomposers are organisms that break the tree down. There's a lot of different ones that we can look for in this tree. Things like millipedes, centipedes, spiders, fungi, bacteria, worms. Here's a millipede. Besides returning the nutrients that plants need to grow from dead trees, decomposition prevents the accumulation of all types of dead material in the forest, so it isn't miles deep.
Over a forest the size of 1 cubic yard, we get about 1 pound of leaves falling per year. If we look at a larger size of the forest, the size of a football field, let's say, 6,400 pounds of leaves would fall over the course of a year. That's 3.2 tons. 3.2 tons is about the weight of 2 cars. So without decomposers, we would have tons and tons of leaf litter piling up in our forests.
Well, decomposition marks the end of our journey here together. Thanks for joining me at the Johnson's Mound Forest Preserve in this woodland habitat. I hope you enjoyed learning about forest ecosystems and the trees that make them up. Go out and put your newfound tree identification skills to use on a hike through the forest preserves in your area. Hope to see you out here soon.